Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the 27th day of September in the year 2016. It is the day after the big debate, the number one between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and I guess that that's pretty much what everybody is talking about. I've talked to a number of people. I just came from a Rotary meeting, and I talked to 10, 15 different people there. And there was nobody there that didn't watch the debate. That's all everybody was talking about. I ran into one person last evening who was not intending to watch the debate. And that surprised me, but it's what everybody's talking about. It's the audience. It must have been huge. Bob Kincaid, in chatting prior to the time I went on the air, made the comment that it was so Super Bowl proportions, and I think he's right. I really do believe. And I've been listening to different reactions from different folks all morning long. Much of the reactions are predictable, and I think it was very interesting that the Drudge Report announced that their polling suggested that in their followers, 80% of the people that they polled believed that Donald Trump won the debate. But generally speaking, I think the general consensus now is that Hillary won the debate. But the fact of the matter is, when the polls are all in, I'm not going to say it's likely that Donald Trump will have won, but I think he has a good chance, because I really do believe that while I have no doubt, I watched the entire thing and I don't have any doubt at all that from every perspective that I can think of, Hillary won it. But on the other hand, I don't think that the difference was wide enough that there would be universal consensus on that. I think that there was the debate was close enough that those who supported Donald Trump could find positives in his performance that would allow them to claim or maintain that he won the debate. In other words, I don't think the differences were drastic enough or wide enough to declare a definitive winner and a definitive loser. I think, barring tripping and falling down, I don't think Bob made the comment. I think it's a very, very good one, that the bar was much higher for Hillary than it was for Donald Trump. What Donald Trump would have had to do in order to really make a major misstep in that debate was would have been incredible. On the other hand, from Hillary's perspective, the only thing she could do was not be successful. Everybody expected her to have a good debate, to be on top of her game, to be well prepared, and anything else. And anything less than that for her would have been a defeat. And I think, given that, I really don't think she did fail. I think she met all expectations. She was as good as people predicted she was. So she would be. So what that means is that the bar for her was much, much higher than it was for Donald Trump, and that seems to be the way it's going. That those people who ardently support Donald Trump will emphasize the points that he made. I did believe, and I have to credit. I was listening on the radio this morning to Smerconish on Sirius Radio, Michael Smerconish, and he made the point. This is his point, not mine, and I think it's well taken. And I kind of made up my mind when I heard it that it's really worth repeating, because I think it's significant. I think that Donald Trump missed a few golden opportunities. One of them is on Hillary's emails. I think he really missed an opportunity there. One of the questions fed right into that, and he let it pass. And instead of that, he went to taxes, and bypassed the emails. And I really think that he lost an opportunity there to raise that issue, which was for him an opportunity, and he didn't take advantage of it. On the other hand, and this is the point that Smerconish made, that I think is very relevant. When Hillary was talking about Donald Trump's tax returns not being released, and made the point that only on 2 occasions have 2 of his tax returns been made public, because those particular ones were part of applications he was making in particular states for casino licenses. And in both of those, he didn't pay any taxes. And in the background, as one of the many interruptions that he was guilty of throughout the 90 minutes, he made the comment and said that's being smart. And the fact of the matter is that comment by Donald Trump was very telling, because what it effectively did was confirm the fact that he didn't pay taxes. And he was, in a sense, boasting about it. Consequently, I think that one is within the realm of likelihood when he says that a major reason his tax returns haven't been made public is because they're likely to show that he pays no taxes year after year after year. And along with it, they're likely to show as well that his generosity to philanthropic organizations and causes has not been nearly as substantial as he's made them out to be. I guess, my prediction would be that if we ever do see them, we're going to find that his generosity to the down and out and to the needy is not nearly what he claims it has been. I think that comment that he made about being smart, in a sense, is extremely telling, because it does indeed confirm that he is taking a position defending those who find ways to avoid taxes. I think all of us who have done income taxes have done that, and have tried to find ways that different issues, things can be deducted that are perhaps questionable. I think all of us have done that. But the fact of the matter is, all of us are not running for president of the United States. And more important than that, all of us are not engaged in the upper echelon of a society which is built around the idea of progressive taxation, and built on the principle that those who make the most should pay the most. And one of the things that we've seen here over and over and over again on the Virtual Center is the basic idea that the people at the top, the people who do best, have a responsibility to give back to the community. By definition, dodging taxes, finding loopholes in order to avoid tax responsibilities, seems to me to contradict that very principle of the idea that people have an obligation to give back according to their means. Basically, finding tax loopholes, stashing money in tax-sheltered accounts offshore, and all of that is evidence of people seeking ways to avoid their responsibilities of citizenship. I think that's very important when we're talking about a race for president of the United States. I really do. And I think that Donald Trump's effort to defend it is in effect no better, no less serious than the infamous 2012 campaign gaffe by Mitt Romney when he talked about the 47%, the people who continually take and try to dodge every opportunity in the world to be responsible for their own well-being. I think, as you know, that particular video, if you'll recall, about the 47%, in the minds of many people, was mostly responsible for sinking Mitt Romney's presidential hopes and campaign. I think this comment by Donald Trump falls into that category because it really is in the same genre. It's pretty much saying the same kind of thing. I think it says an awful lot about Donald Trump. It's not that we didn't know it about Donald Trump, but when he admits it and brags about it, then in effect what he's saying is the tax system is filled with loopholes that only the people at the top have an opportunity to take advantage of, and I'm one of those and I'm proud of it. And the fact of the matter is, that's not the kind of attitude or mentality, it seems, that most of us would want from the President of the United States. That's the reason why traditionally those elected to be president have put their private affairs in blind trusts and all the rest of it, in order to avoid even the suggestion that self-interest might creep into their policymaking obligations as President of the United States. It's also very clear, given his inclination to brag about such things, that blind trusts and those kinds of protections in the case of Donald Trump are going to be meaningless. Because it's clear that he places his self-interest, satisfying his own self-interest, as being his number one priority. Not service, not public service or community service or anything like that. I think that comment was extremely telling. And again, I heard it on Michael Smuconis this morning. He's the one that made the thing that by saying that in the background, he effectively was admitting that he doesn't pay taxes, and he goes into every tax year with an attitude of trying to figure out ways to dodge tax responsibilities. I think he's exactly right. And I think that's very significant. And I'm kind of surprised that one of the pundits on the major media has not yet picked up on that, at least made of it all that's there, because I think there's quite a bit there. Anyway, it was a very, very interesting evening. It's reality television like no other. And of course, for those of us who I guess we could label ourselves political junkies, my wife calls me that all the time, so I guess she knows better than anybody what I am. But we were at a function in the last, these are the kinds of situations that I need to attend because of the political campaign, although it was not the kind of function where politicking was appropriate. So I didn't bring cards or anything like that. In fact, my wife was a little bit critical and thought that I ought to bring cards. And I said, basically, the purpose of this is to promote the community efforts of an organization, a public community foundation. That's why people were there. That's the focus of the evening. And it would not be appropriate to start handing out political cards in that environment. And I was right, it turned out, because nobody else was. It would have been very appropriate. But my point was, I was there, and as the event moved to about 8:30, 20 till 9, I started to get nervous. Finally, I told my wife, I said, I got to get out of here. I don't want to miss any of that debate. So I left early, and my wife joined me about 15 to 20 minutes into the debate, because I didn't want to miss anything. And like Hillary Clinton's staff, I heard a report this morning that some of her staff people had advised her that the first half hour to 40 minutes of a 90-minute debate is the most important. that meant that the first 20 minutes would be very significant. And I personally believe that the first 20 minutes to the first half hour was probably when Donald Trump's performance was his strongest. So if Hillary's staff is correct and the first half hour is the most important, then that would ultimately support the conclusion that a number of people are going to say that Donald Trump did pretty well, because in the first half hour, he did his best for the whole evening. It started after the first half hour. I think his performance started to decline. He was interrupting more and more. He was trying to talk over Hillary more and more. He was trying to bully her, unlike what he did in the first half hour. And by the time he got toward the end of the debate, the last half hour, when he got to the comments about Rosie O'Donnell, I felt that then he was just out of control. He was just sliding around and moving from issue to issue. He didn't seem to be making any point at all. So in that sense, I thought that Hillary Clinton's performance was the best by the normal rules for judging a debate. But again, this is not a normal debate. This is not a normal presidential year. So I think in coming days, we're going to get more and more feedback on what the outcome of that debate was. And I think that there's enough that happened during that 90 minutes to justify some people's claim that Donald Trump actually might have won it. I think there are strong points that he made. I think his attack on Hillary being a career politician and him being the voice of change or the winds of change and all of that, I think that was very effective. I thought that was very effective. And I thought that labeling her as one of the people who's been in office long enough to fix many of the problems that she's now running on with promises to fix, I think that was a strong position he made. Now, whether in fact people will appreciate it or not, I don't know, but I thought it was very, very strong. Anyway, with those comments, I want to I haven't as yet given you the phone numbers, and I would love to hear your reactions. I don't want to necessarily turn our entire time together over to a general discussion about the debate, but if that's where you would like to go, then I would love to do it. More important, I would just love to hear you. If you listened to yesterday's program, you know that our friend Horst from Taiwan called in about 15 minutes before the end of the program yesterday. And we had a delightful 15 minutes. And, of course, he was on storm alert. And I noticed this morning that the storm, the typhoon that was bearing down on Taiwan has indeed passed, and there was quite a bit of damage there. And I have to trust that our friend Horst is safe and that things are okay. But we would love to hear from you here at the Virtual Center, and we have a phone number that is there, reserved primarily for that purpose. So if you'd like to be heard on the debate, on the performance of one or the other candidates, or on some of the issues that we touched upon yesterday in our program, and we'll be back to a couple of them in a moment, then by all means feel free to do that. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. Again, that's 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to drop an email to me and trust me to get your point on the air, I would be glad to do that on your behalf. Just send your email to waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906, all one word, lowercase, @gmail.com. And finally, I call your attention to our Facebook page. We're moving into probably about a year, close to a year, that we've had our Facebook page in operation. May not quite be that long, but it seems like we're well over 6 months anyway. And there are a number of postings on that Facebook page on contemporary issues of the day. And they are opinion pieces. They are designed to solicit your reactions, your opinions, your comments. And besides being an opportunity for commenting on Facebook itself, we do have, of course, my email address, waobrien906@gmail.com, or our phone number, and you could call in and react to some of the things that you feel are worthy of your reaction. Just call our number 304-663-4676. About an hour and a half before we came on the air today, I posted an item on Facebook, on our Virtual Center Facebook page, that really touches upon what we were dealing with at the end of yesterday's program. So I think that's probably a good way to begin today by picking up on where we were yesterday. If you remember, the bulk of yesterday's program was spent on higher education, on the issue of administrative structures in higher education, in terms of their effectiveness or ineffectiveness to manage, organize, and direct higher education services to the most appropriate recipients. Basically, what we were talking about was the issue of effectiveness and efficiency in higher education policy making. And we were using an article that appeared in our local paper here in West Virginia, the West Virginia Charleston Gazette, which is printed in our state's capital, and it is the state's liberal newspaper, the Gazette. The Daily Mail is the more conservative paper, and the two of these publications have merged over the last couple of years. In the Gazette, there was an article on the organizational structure for higher education in West Virginia. The history of that of higher education administrative structure in West Virginia was included in the article, along with an rather obvious disconnect between what state commissions and boards are empowered to do versus what they see, what the members of these commissions see as their legislative responsibilities when it comes to higher education. And generally, what we concluded is that over the last several years, here in West Virginia at least, our Higher Education Policy Commission, which regulates public higher education here in West Virginia, except for the community colleges, which has their own board, their own commission, that the members of the commission, the Higher Education Policy Commission, have seen fit in recent years to return much of decision and policy-making authority to the local institutions, with the result that there is serious questions, which this article raises, about what exactly the role of the state commission is in higher education. Because many of the responsibilities and duties that legislators and members of the public generally here in West Virginia, many of the things that people believed this commission was created to do, members of the commission itself don't really believe that they have the power to do that. They believe that the power is in the institutions and ought to be in the institutions. Consequently, what that has meant is that these commissions have pretty well redefined their own power from governing to advisory, to being advisory boards to higher education, rather than being decision-making structures to which the institutions are accountable. That's really the issue. And the fact of the matter is, these two commissions, the Community College Commission as well as the admission that oversees colleges and universities in West Virginia, have a total annual budget in the neighborhood of $3.5 million a year. So the question raised by an audit is, given the Commission's own admission that their duties are primarily advisory, are the taxpayers of West Virginia getting a good deal in allocating $3.5 million a year to administrative structures that are only advisory? That's the discussion, that's the debate. That consumed the better part of half of our program yesterday. In our second hour yesterday, we were looking at the issue of economic growth. And of course, the fact of the matter is the role of higher education, which was the first hour, is directly related to the issue of economic growth and expansion as well. I think there's no question that most people assume that there is a close connection between economic development in today's world and higher education. We looked at the writings and the work of an economist from Stanford University, Enrico Menotti, who wrote a book in 2012 entitled The Geography of Jobs. And in that book, Menotti addresses the issues of what he calls brain hubs, municipal communities within the nation that seem to thrive on economic development, on creativity, on attracting the brightest people. These are the communities that are thriving in our society. These are the communities that up-and-coming professional people want to raise their children, their families in. And what Menotti points out is that there are well in excess of 300 metropolitan communities in the United States, but only a small minority of them are what we would call brain hubs. They become organic, self-sustaining, economically thriving communities. And the example that he gives as being the most obvious one is Silicon Valley. I think everybody's heard of Silicon Valley. Everybody knows the kinds of things that go on there. Everybody knows that young, aspiring professionals look to locate in Silicon Valley because the quality of life and standard of living there is one in which people would like to locate and raise their families. What Menotti does is go through and try to find out what it is that makes these communities the thriving enterprises that they have become. What sustains them? What makes them so attractive to young, up-and-coming, creative people? And the example, one of his chapters, contrasts Silicon Valley with Detroit and points out that Detroit in the 50s and 60s was one of these brain hubs for the automobile industry. Anybody that was connected in any way to the automobile industry had to be in Detroit. That's where the action was. That's where the engineers were. That's where the talent was. That's the community to which the brightest minds in the industry were migrating. But somehow, Detroit didn't diversify. And consequently, it's lost its pizzazz. Eventually, it was, it entered into serious competition with foreign manufacturers, primarily from Japan. And gradually, the quality of life in Detroit began to deteriorate. Silicon Valley has never experienced that. Silicon Valley has continued to grow as society has moved from agriculture to manufacturing to technology. Silicon Valley has been able to move with it and stay out in front of it. And consequently, it's become the classic example of what this author refers to as a brain hub. I think I called the author, the economist in question, Enrico Minotti. It's Enrico Moretti, and that's my error. Moretti. Enrico Moretti. I apologize for that. Anyway, what we ended our program with, and this is what I put on Facebook this morning, mid-morning, as a result of yesterday's program, was an interview that Professor Moretti had on NPR with Ari Shapiro. That interview took place on September 20th, a week ago. And in that article, or in that conversation, Moretti was addressing the issues of social mobility, pointing out that the greatest opportunities for social mobility, for moving up, moving ahead in a growing, economically vibrant community, existed in these so-called brain hubs. And what he points out is that economic opportunity, social mobility, is not only available to the well-educated in these communities, but even those people who live there who do not go to college, who are merely high school graduates, are doing well in these communities which continue to thrive. And he points out that there is a symmetry between the concept of social mobility in American society and the location or the realities of these brain hubs. That's the title of his book, The Geography of Jobs. The greatest opportunities for jobs at every level seem to be focused in these particular municipal communities, which he calls brain hubs. But the question that Ari Shapiro placed to him is, what can communities do? What can governments do? Local governments, state governments, to stimulate economic development, economic growth? And the issue at hand was the issue of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, railroads, airports, obviously aiding and abetting trade, business, commerce. Moretti made the point that while these are very important to sustained economic growth, they pale in comparison to governments' willingness to invest in people. And this is really where we were toward the end of our program when Horst called. And so I wanted to go back and touch upon it in today's program in order to continue to move forward from that point, because I think these issues are incredibly important and incredibly vital to our mission here at the Virtual Center. Moretti makes the point that the payoff, the benefits of investment in people far outweigh a community's investment in infrastructure, in concrete, in buildings and roads, and all the rest of it. Those are important. But what drives the economic growth and what drives the opportunities for social mobility are the characteristics of the people who live and work in these communities. That needs to be the focus of society's investment, Moretti argues, and his research reinforces that particular point. His research is what proved and developed that point, and that's the basis on which he continues to write and continues to speak. The reason that I tuned in on this is because this is the point that we've been emphasizing for so long here at the Virtual Center. The issue of society's willingness to invest in its own people, in what the economists call human capital. This is, you'll recall, the very same thing that the Pope's encyclical from a year and a half ago now, almost, it was June last year, June 2015, that the Pope's encyclical on climate emphasized governments' needs throughout the world to invest in people, because ultimately the purpose of economic development, the purpose of an economy at all, is for the well-being of the people who make up that community. So anything that communities can do or that their governments can do to improve the lot of citizens is a positive. And that's what the Pope was talking about. That corporations, especially corporations, needed to abandon their tendency to make all their economic decisions based on bottom line quantitative issues, basis for decisions. That ultimately what corporations must begin doing is looking at the ultimate outcome for people in these kinds of decisions. In other words, the moral question, the question of human capital and what happens to people needs to drive economic decision making, so argued the Pope last year in his encyclical. This is the point that economist Enrico Moretti is making and made in this particular interview on NPR with Ari Shapiro. Moretti made the point, and I think I read part of this quote yesterday. I'd like to read 2 paragraphs from this interview, but I read one yesterday, but I think I'd like to share with you a second one today. Moretti said, if anything, existing economic policy discourages geographical mobility. Shapiro raised the point, asked the question, if certain so-called brain hubs offer such social mobility opportunities, why don't more people move to them? Why don't people leave the areas that they're in and migrate to the areas that are growing and thriving if the opportunities there are so much more plentiful? Moretti's response to that question, he says, existing economic policy discourages this kind of geographical mobility. For example, he says, if you're on unemployment insurance and you're receiving a check because you were recently unemployed, you have very little incentive to move from a low-performing city to a stronger labor market, say to move from Flint to a place like Chicago, because the unemployment insurance doesn't adjust for the cost of living. So you have all the incentives to stay in a high unemployment, low-performing city rather than moving to a stronger labor market that might cost you more. The fact of the matter is, the reason there's more economic opportunity and more social mobility possible in these so-called brain hubs is because the cost of living is higher. Inflation is operating in these communities. It costs more to live well in these communities. So if you're on a fixed income, if you're retired or if you're unemployed, then if you're living on a fixed income, your objective is to live in the lowest cost area that you can find to stay where you are. Because if your area has no jobs, if large numbers of people are on unemployment, then inflation is not a factor there. Cost of living doesn't go up. And for fixed income people, that's the best place to be because you get more for your dollar, so to speak. What Moretti is saying is that reality discourages people to move from moving to the high growth areas. So I think that is very, very significant. And then Moretti goes on to the issue of investment in people. And he said, I think infrastructure investment might have very positive effects on economic growth. But I think that by far the most efficient way to increase economic mobility is to invest not in physical infrastructure, but in the human capital of economic workers, meaning their education and their skill. I think most economic studies point to the fact that the dollar spent, the public dollar spent, in investing in education as some of the highest return both for workers and for society relative to pretty much any other public investment we can make. So I think investing in pavement, bridges, roads might help, but investing in education, training, and skills will help much more. And that is the thinking of Stanford economist Enrico Moretti. And you might, if you go online, you can find reviews of his 2012 book, The Geography of Jobs. And I think it might be a book that many people would like to get their hands on and look at. One of the things that did impress me is that I noticed on the internet that you can pick up a copy of this book for as little as $2.99 on Kindle. So if you order an electronic copy of this particular book, you can read it at very inexpensive, in a very inexpensive way. So it might be something that a number of you would be inclined to do. That kind of, it seems to me, concludes the economic issue that we were dealing with yesterday, which was the thinking and the research of Enrico Moretti. I think it's very important. And it ties so well with the issues of higher education that we were dealing with as well. And there's one other consideration or factor that I'd like to introduce into all of this. It relates to the economy, but more particularly, it relates to today's economy, to the so-called, I keep using this term because it seems so appropriate to me, the so-called new capitalism that we considered in the writings of Richard Sennett. And not to go back over all of Richard Sennett's research again, but you recall that in describing or defining the new capitalism, Sennett made the point that the skills and values associated with success in today's economy have changed so much from what used to be the most valued characteristics in the old economy, in the old capitalism, that the differences are dramatic. The skill demands are much higher. But more important than skill demands are mobility and flexibility. The fact that the economy is changing. We're in a society that is driven more and more by technology, by technological change, by innovation. And what that means is that in order to be successful within that economy, people need to be mobile, they need to be flexible, they need to be able to move, and they need to be able to retool their skills, to upgrade their skills in order to move from one opportunity to the next opportunity. Being mired in the same job over and over again for all of your working life is no longer a possibility in today's capitalistic economy. What we're talking about is a real situation where people will move and change jobs, oftentimes change professions 4, 5, even 6 times during their working lives. And the only people that can do that effectively are people who are flexible and mobile, who are continually upgrading their skills, and who are willing to move and willing to take advantage of opportunities, new opportunities that present themselves. That's really a feature, the key features of what Richard Sennett defines as the new capitalism. I'd like to share with you a perspective that I picked up over this past weekend that I'd like to share with you. This is an article that I found in an internet on a digital publication called truthout.org. I don't know how many of you have ever looked at that particular website. Truthout, T-R-U-T-H-O-U-T, truthout.org. I find that it's very helpful on a regular basis to check out that particular website, because some of the most perceptive, creative thinking in areas and issues that affect us seem to appear on that particular website. This past weekend, I found yet another example of that particular principle. And I'd like to share it with you because right now we're into the area of higher education, into the area of economic growth and economic development. And it seems timely and appropriate for us to pursue this particular issue. So let me introduce it right now. It is an article by Peter Ruff, R-U-G-H. I'm assuming the pronunciation is Ruff. And the title of the article is Apt to be Screwed. Workers reckon with the gig economy. What attracted me was the term gig economy, because obviously it has something to do with internet technology. The title Apt to be Screwed, let me share with you, is not APT. It's not apt, the likelihood of. This is APPED. What we're talking about here are mobile apps. Software applications that people have access to on iPhones, on Androids, on the internet. Basically, what this article addresses is a facet of the technological economy that is driven principally by technology. More important, the article addresses working people in that kind of a working environment. What is happening to people who seek work opportunities in a digital age? And what the author, Peter Ruff, points out is that many of the things that are happening as part of our changing digital economy are not positive, are not good for working people. That in effect, the software industry is increasingly taking advantage of technological skills available in the labor force. But unfortunately, these jobs don't come with benefits. They don't come with full-time employment. They don't come with stability. Rather, they mirror the ingredients of the new capitalism. They're temporary, part-time opportunities with no benefits. And more people are being forced to find their way in this kind of an economy. It's an economy that is working for employers. It is not an economy that is working for people who are trying to make a living in this kind of environment. What the author points out is that many of these newest enterprises that are hitting the stock market big time, corporations or companies like Uber, for example, or Airbnb, some of these newest innovations in the so-called gig economy are exploiting workers to the point that it almost looks like a throwback to the pre-union periods when America was engaged in the implementation or development of a manufacturing economy. Many of these companies, for example, who offer employment opportunities to skilled people, take a huge cut from the opportunities. If you take one of these jobs, then you pay the company a fee, which oftentimes is very, very high. Uber, for example, will oftentimes take 15% of every fare. Uber is the company where you can drive your own car and compete with taxi companies in some of our largest metropolitan areas. The rates are lower. The efficiency is much better because you don't have to wait for a cab or anything like that, because you have these people that are on call with their own cars. So if you need transportation, you can get it quick with Uber and get it cheaper. And this provides economic opportunity for people who want to subsidize or supplement their incomes by driving for Uber on a part-time basis. But the fact is, Uber takes a cut. Sometimes that cut is significant. 15%, for example. In fact, I wanted to, let me get to the heart of the article. Under the heading, "You Are a Commodity," the author, Peter Ruff, makes the point that in this kind of a working environment, working people are being exploited by these companies, by these gig companies in a gig economy. Silicon Valley, for example, this fellow argues, has become adept at sucking value out of nearly everything. eBay, if you remember eBay, was an early pioneer of this kind of business model. If you had a box of old G.I. Joes in your basement, you could sell them on eBay for a fee. Airbnb applies the same concept to your home. If you have an extra room in your house that you wanted to rent, you can earn additional income. You can become a freelance hotelier. Uber does the same thing with cars. You can become a taxi driver, pay off your loan on your own Mazda, the author says. It's almost as if Silicon Valley is in the business of allowing no commodity to exist without seizing every possible opportunity to squeeze money out of it. Now, the author says, the gig economy is applying these same principles to working people. Here's an example, a testimonial from one of the people we're talking about. I'll go and do a task for TaskRabbit on my lunch break. Then I'll go back to work. Naya, a Brooklyn native in her 20s, told this publication. In addition to holding 2 steady part-time jobs, she's also going to school and fitting in gigs through the hiring platform. My mom worked 2 jobs for 20 years. But I feel like for a generation, there are very few jobs to go around. There aren't any long-term possibilities. You have to find something else to supplement your income because the wages aren't stable. So what you end up doing is paying a fee to these operations like Uber, like Airbnb, a very substantial fee. But more important than that is the fact that the employer claims no responsibility for your livelihood as an employee. The author says the following. They want all the benefits of being a service provider without any of the responsibilities of being a service provider. Uber is taking 35% of the amount of any fare. Airbnb takes 13 to 15% of any rental. They're involved in every transaction. They take a significant amount of money from every transaction. Yet when push comes to shove, they say, this is not our responsibility. We want nothing to do with it if anything goes wrong. So these companies, these employers, are claiming the best of all possible worlds. They are making financial opportunities available for you as an employee, but they are also getting a significant fee for providing that opportunity with none of the responsibilities, none of the liability that is usually associated with being in business. This kind of smacks of what Donald Trump was talking about in the debate last night about being smart in avoiding taxes. That what is rewarded in this kind of an economy is maximizing your profits while you minimize your liability and your responsibilities. And the person who pays for that is the employee. It is almost a throwback to the manufacturing world, which led to the creation of unions, of organized labor to protect the rights and prevent the exploitation of working people. This is exploitation, but it's exploitation under a whole new set of standards and labels. You are not an employee. You are an independent contractor. You are not a secretary. You are an administrative assistant. As an independent contractor, you have no responsibilities. You have no rights, no protections. Your employer is responsible to you for nothing. They get the benefits, you carry the responsibilities and the liabilities. That, according to this article, is increasingly what the world of work in the 21st century is becoming in this digital world, this gig world of economic growth and economic opportunity. Let's go back to Richard Sennett. He talks about the fact that the opportunities in the new capitalism are driven by one's ability to be mobile and flexible. And that's exactly what these particular employees need to be, mobile and flexible. What's missing, however, is the security and the stability that traditionally goes with jobs, with employment. When you took a full-time job in the world of manufacturing, you became a full-time employee with certain rights and certain protections. You got paid holidays. You got health benefits. You got retirement benefits. You got other kinds of fringe benefits like overtime pay and time and a half for working in excess of 8 hours or 40 hours a week. None of this applies anymore. It's an employer's world that we are rapidly moving into. Gig economy platforms, this article says, pitch their services as digitally innovative, providing flexibility to workers and greater convenience to customers. But as modern as the CEOs of billion-dollar startups want the gig economy to seem, it's actually turning back the clock on the gains workers fought for and won over the past 150 years. This new economy is working almost exclusively for the benefit of employers, not for the benefit of employees. And so a world of work which demands that you be mobile and you be flexible is a world of work that is able to exploit you at the same time that you're given all sorts of protections and accolades, in the process. Let me go on. Something just occurred to me that I think would be a good example of this. I can remember when I was in high school, my dad worked in industry. My dad worked in a bakery. He didn't bake, he was the shipper. He was the one who boxed up the cake and the cake products for sale and shipped them to various distributors in various towns. We were located in Boston. So this was all throughout New England. They had markets all throughout New England. And they would make the same products under different labels for different companies. And then these companies would distribute those products as their own, even though they were all made in this one place. My dad was a union worker. He was an hourly employee, received benefits like time and a half for overtime, double time for working holidays, that kind of thing. Of course, chances are business was never quite good enough in that business to bring many of those benefits his way. But one of the things, this is my point, one of the things that I remember is that my dad worked all by himself in the shipping department. He was shipping in that company. It was a one-man operation. And I remember one time when the president of the company, the owner of the company, told my dad that as a reward for the years of service that he had put in, that they were going to give him his own office. And off in the corner of the shipping room, there was an office where Dad used to sit with when truckers would come in and load up the trucks with baked goods. They would go into this office, which had a long conference table in it. And my dad would go in and they would sit down and fill out the paperwork for the shipment of bakery supplies. So many boxes, et cetera, time of shipment, anticipated time of delivery, that kind of stuff. So this was the place where they used to do the paperwork for the shipments. And the owner of the company decided that it would be a good thing, and it was a good thing, to put my dad's name on that office and make that his office, since the whole operation was his anyway. It was an effort to basically give my dad the kind of pat on the back that really didn't benefit anything but his ego. It made him feel good and it made him feel important. It cost the company nothing, except for the $1.50 or $2 it cost to print the placard with his name on it that they attached to the door with 2 wood screws. But the thing I remember most was how elated and flattered my dad was when he came home and told us at dinner one night that the company had done that for him. In his mind, in his world, that company couldn't have done anything that he would have appreciated more than having his name on an office door, having the recognition of a job well done. From the company's perspective, and I came to appreciate this later, from the company's perspective, the move was shrewd. It was brilliant. It was low cost, highly beneficial. Dad was inclined to work a little bit harder in order to earn the responsibilities of having that office. He used to make a point every Friday afternoon before closing up for the weekend of spending his last hour making sure that his office was clean, so that when people came in the following Monday, they would be impressed by how neat and how clean he kept his office. It was a win-win. The company got a lot of benefits out of it. I think that it's obvious why they would. But to be realistic about it, my dad got a lot out of it too. It meant an awful lot to him. He used to say on occasion, I never graduated from high school. I had to go to work when I had to quit school in the 8th grade to go to work and support my mom and my brothers and sisters. And for me to come from that kind of a background and have my own office with my name on it meant more than anyone could possibly imagine. That is very similar to what we see happening in what the author of this article refers to as the gig economy. You're not dealing with employees. You're not dealing with paid labor. You're not dealing with people who are made to believe that they are a step below you on the community or social totem pole. These people are independent contractors. They move in to do a specific job. They do it well. They collect their pay and they're gone. The company or the employer bears no responsibility, no liability. All the employer has done is find the person who can perform the service in the fastest, most effective, most efficient way possible. Get the service done, the company wins, and it has cost the company minimally. The company has encountered or encumbered no responsibilities, no liabilities for this particular venture. Whatever responsibilities and liabilities there might be are borne by the employee, who is now not an employee, but an independent contractor. The implications being, you're self-employed. You don't work for anybody, you work for yourself. You're an entrepreneur. You are, on paper, all the things that a capitalist economy values and encourages. You have the skills, you're constantly upgrading your skills, you're constantly making yourself more attractive in the market, more attractive to employers. And you're costing the employers nothing in terms of responsibility or liability to you for anything other than the agreed upon price. They get the best job for the least cost in the shortest time. You get income plus the opportunity to label yourself as an independent contractor, not an employee. In other words, you can make the case that you're on the same level that they are. You don't work for them. You are making your skills available to them for a fee. That is the nature of the world of work that the technological age is building and building rapidly. Let me say, as a way to begin to wrap this up, that in reality, this is a part of the so-called new capitalism that Richard Sennett could not have foreseen. This is the part, and one of the most interesting things, this is the part of the world of work that IRS hasn't really planned for either. Because if you think about filling out your income taxes, you got W-2s from your employer, and you included those with your taxes. You totaled up your incomes on all the different W-2s and submitted it as your gross income for the year. The implication was that the short version of the income tax form, when you do your income taxes, there's the short version and the long version where you claim deductions. It used to be, in the industrial world, that employees did the short form. No H&R Block necessary. Filling out your income taxes was easy. You had one W-2, so much withholding, took the standard deductions, signed it, sent your income tax form in on April 15th. It was simple, it was clean, and it was neat, and there was no opportunity there for an H&R Block to go into business. The only ones that benefited from the long form were employers, were self-employed business people who had enough deductions to take advantage of them over the standard deduction. Now, as an independent contractor, you have well over 1 or 2 W-2s. Likely, you have 8 to 10 W-2s in the course of a year. You necessarily must take advantage of the long form. You must take advantage of deductions because you have mileage costs, clothing costs, other kinds of costs associated with doing your job that the standard deductions couldn't possibly cover. The point I'm trying to make is that the gig economy has outstripped the income tax system that we've lived under for so long. The income tax system that we currently have is a system driven by a world defined by manufacturing, defined by industry. The gig economy does not fit that particular world. But again, as an independent contractor and not an employee, you can claim all of the bragging rights that go with being an entrepreneur, being self-employed. But the fact of the matter is, you are an employee, you are more than likely an exploited employee, and those who employ you are able to do it for maximum benefit to themselves. They get the benefits, they bear few, if any, of the liabilities and responsibilities. How prominent is this particular world? What are we talking about here in terms of the gig economy? How big is it? How many people are involved in it? I think some of these numbers are particularly instructive. Intuit, which is a contemporary research firm, Intuit predicts that the number of contingent workers in the United States will exceed 40% of the workforce by the year 2020. 3 years from now, 40% of the workforce will be engaged in this kind of financial activity. This is the new capitalism from the bottom up, so to speak. This is the world for which we are training people to be successful in the new economy. It seems to me that we've got to make some serious decisions about whether, in fact, this is the kind of world that we merely want to adjust to, or whether it's a world that we ought to try to find ways to change. According to this study, a February survey, a survey done in February of 2016, found, quote, that nearly 35% of today's total workforce is composed of non-employee workers. The figure includes freelancers, independent contractors, and temporary workers. And again, Intuit predicts that the 35% will become 40% of the workforce by the year 2020. This author makes the point that Silicon Valley is taking advantage of the 2008 recession that pushed workers off payrolls into a precarious job market where there's less work to go around and wages aren't close to what they used to be. Part-time and contract jobs in the past tended to rise during recessions and recede during recoveries. When people lost their jobs during economic slowdowns, workers were forced to take part-time jobs. But when the economy recovered, these part-time employees went back to becoming full-time employees. But no more, no longer. Part-time workers have accounted for more than 10% of U.S. job growth in the years since the recession officially ended in June of 2009. And all the while, union membership has continued to slide since the mid-1980s. This is the new economy. These are the skills that Richard Sennett defined for us. This is the look at that world from the top down, from the perspective of Silicon Valley looking at its future. The companies in Silicon Valley looking to its future. This is the kind of workforce that they demand. These are the opportunities that are most available. They are part-time opportunities without benefits. What does that mean? It means that individuals are going to have to purchase their own security. They're going to have to buy not only their own home protection systems, they're going to have to buy their own health care. They're going to have to contribute to their own retirement. They're going to be responsible for their own future in their retirement years. Many of the responsibilities and liabilities that employers traditionally assumed in our world of work no longer exist. Employers are being freed from all of these liabilities and all of these responsibilities in the new economy. I think all of us need to be aware of this. When we hear people argue that this society is overtaxing and strangling corporate America and making competition in a world competitive capitalist society difficult for our employers. From this perspective, our employers are doing very well. Most of the liabilities, most of the heavy lifting, if you will, is being done by employees who are no longer called employees. They are being called independent contractors and entrepreneurs. But I go back to the story of my own father, putting his name on the office for the cost of the placard and nothing more is tantamount to what's happening in this so-called gig economy. It seems to me, we're at 55 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 5 minutes left in our program today. It seems to me that this particular issue is really important in light of the issues that we've been dealing with both yesterday and today. Namely, the issues of higher education, the issues of training our workforce for the economic opportunities available in the 21st century. Is this the kind of working opportunities that we're talking about? It seems to me that all of us need to get a clearer picture of what it is we're talking about, because this may not be the way that we want to go. This might not be the world that we want the livelihoods of our children to depend upon. This is high risk work for many people. It seems to me that all of us need to be aware of it, and all of us need to find people to prepare for it or find alternatives to it. The people who can't make it in this kind of an environment, the people who find it impossible to develop the skills, the kinds of technological skills needed, they're the people that are falling through the cracks at the beginning. But it seems to me eventually all people, all working people, are going to begin to appreciate the liabilities and the negatives of this particular work environment. I think that there are a number of messages that all of us could benefit from. One of them seems to me to be clear, and that's the message to organized labor, to unions. If this is the direction that work is going in the 21st century, if this is the kind of employment world that is replacing the traditional industrial world in which unions learn to thrive, then it seems to me that organized labor must make the kind of adjustments necessary for them to be effective and attractive in this kind of world. It seems to me that unions need to get a handle on exactly what's happening in this world in order that they can figure out what they can do to make their services more attractive to independent contractors. It seems to me that if you, as an independent contractor, as an employee, are willing to sell your labor, sell your skills to an employer in this kind of an environment, where you bear all of the liability and all of the responsibility, and the employer bears none, that it seems to me it would work to your benefit if you had the right to spend a portion of your income in this particular enterprise paying for the representation of representatives who would look out for your best interests, because nobody else is. I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for organized labor to retool and take advantage of this kind of economic development. With that, I think it's really time to call it a day. We're at 59 minutes after the hour. So let me thank you for being with us today and invite you back tomorrow for another edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Let me give you a preview. Tomorrow, I'd like to deal with the Colin Kaepernick protests to the not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and for the national anthem. I'd like to deal with this whole issue of Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and the issue of protest. I think it's there. I think everybody's involved with it. I really think that there's a lot here to examine, and I'd like to take that on in our program tomorrow. This is Bill O'Brien. Thank you so very much for listening. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you.